Okay, we are live. Good morning, everyone. It's Friday morning, and this is the Senate Transportation Committee. And we're going to continue our discussion to hopefully get 99.9% done today. For the T-bill that we can send it to appropriations. And so with that, we've got the whole morning dedicated to this issue. And Anthea, I think, is with us, and Michelle is with us. And so with that, Anthea, would you like to take the lead and continue our walkthrough? Try to resolve some of the issues as we progress, okay?
Sure thing. So,
any questions from the committee thus far? I know we're going to take the final vote as we go. Everything is caught up, but anybody have any questions before we continue on?
I just want to revisit section 28D and chat about that at some point in time.
What section was that, Senator?
It's 28D, which would ban the installation of new oil or gas-fired heating equipment in buildings under the control of Agency of Transportation. I just don't think that is something that technology has caught up with us at this point in time. And I just really feel strongly we need to change that language. We've already seen with Burlington that we can't electrify the whole fleet of buses because if not, we wouldn't have any buses running at this point in time. And you can park a bus, you can't park a building. I have 3 heat pumps in my house right now. I'm a big fan of them, but it's not enough to heat my house. I have to have 2 other heat sources to offset it. So I think that I think technology will catch up with us at some point in time, but it's not there to solely rely on heat pumps and such to heat big buildings. And I'd like to revisit that language and soften that language up so that the flexibility in transportation can be that they can be a best fit situation for the buildings that they need to maintain.
Okay, all right. Okay, we will do that.
Is that Andy's language?
Language, Senator Hertzler?
I wasn't sure. I missed the very beginning of what Senator Ingalls said. Was that's on the amendment about wood and other heating and?
Yeah, it proposes that it bans the installation of new oil or gas-fired heating equipment in buildings under the control of Agency of Transportation. And I can't agree to that. I just can't. It's just not where our technology isn't there, and we can't tie our hands. We can't tie our hands that much. We have to have some flexibility.
Okay. Do you want to have a discussion about this now, Senator Mazza? Or?
Have we already gone through this section, or?
No, not really. I mean,
okay. All right. Let's get
through
on.
it.
We get to it. We'll take it up. Okay. All right, Anthea, go ahead.
okay, great. And then just as we're going back, we're going to be at section 28. So we'll get to 28D shortly. And I just, because Liz isn't here and Jeannie's covering, but she can't post documents, I will share updated language for 28D when we get to it, but I also just emailed it because Senator Perchlik has a proposal there.
Thank you.
So we left off at section 28, and I'm putting the share screen side by side up for this one. And I think it might actually be helpful a little bit for the committee to see the 3 columns of the side by side, because this is the work zone study and report section as it came out of House Transportation. However, in the governor's recommended policy language, this was that pilot program that I think you've heard about. There were going to be warnings issued. It was going to be over the course of a year. There was going to be reporting back on the success of the pilot program. So I don't know if the committee has sort of questions about that, or if you just want to focus on the study language that came out of the House. I think you've talked about this a lot. I don't know how much time you've spent with the language. So this one might require a little bit more committee discussion than some of the other sections. So I will take my lead from all of you as to what you would like to do.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, go right ahead, Senator Chetna.
I've been the squeaky wheel on this. I'll just say the following. I'm fine with the language from the House. I support the original language, but I don't feel like twisting any arms or making a really strong case to go back to that original language. I think what the House has is moving in the right direction, but if the committee is of similar mind that what the governor put forward, which I think was coming from VTrans, which they feel comfortable using that word pilot, then I fully support the original language. But again, it's not a huge deal, and I think the language as is fine as well.
Michelle, comment?
Senator Mazza and committee, I do apologize that my video is not working today. But the Agency of Transportation is fine with going with the House crafted version of the language. It will be, we have a little disaster here at home.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. It will be, we had originally planned to kind of have a 2-year process anyways. And so we're fine with sort of coming back and checking in and bringing the recommendations for the second half of the pilot effort next legislative session after we do this first half.
Any questions?
No,
Comment?
I would say then let's go with the House if that's agreeable to Michelle and doesn't, in light of it, not that we would always defer to Michelle, but
We
and-
should.
but it's also one less thing that you're going to have to negotiate with
Right,
the
right.
House. And to me, it's not something that's worth
Okay,
the time to do that.
okay, I sense it's all right. Okay,
Yep,
Good.
I'm good.
all
I
right.
have one question for the committee.
Sure.
You will see that there are findings in this section. So I know you sometimes do not want to include them. So I'm just going to alert you to the fact that there are 3 findings there. If you want to take them out, it doesn't change anything about the deliverable or what the agency is required to do, but they would not be there.
Jane, you like findings?
No, I don't. I hate all this plug language.
You want to take it out?
Let's take it out.
Take it
Yeah,
out.
let's take it out.
Okay, out. As
I did
short,
have a question, and Thea, on
go ahead.
I love this. There are times. It's sort of like it was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
All right, go right ahead.
it was a dark, stormy night. So on page 40, Anthea, there's a pink highlight in the Senate column,
Oh,
but I can't read what it is.
it is nothing. It's the word pilot has been deleted.
Uh,
So the House directed me to take out pilot everywhere that it appeared. I'll take it so you can see. The House directed me to take out pilot wherever it appeared, since this report could lead to a recommendation that this shouldn't be a pilot program. It should be, we go straight to issuing warnings on a long-term basis, or actually using it as a means of enforcement and issuing tickets the way that some states are treating their automated traffic enforcement devices. So if you see in the middle column, what timeline or timelines if a pilot program, and instead it says, and under what timelines or timelines if a program that utilizes automated traffic law enforcement systems within.
Could you clarify that? In other words, the House is asking us to amend their own language?
No, they had, in their language, they had told me to delete the word pilot, and I had deleted it everywhere, but I missed it in one location. So the intention was pilot should have been deleted
Oh,
in all of
okay.
the language. That is the only place that pilot appeared.
Oh, okay, thank you.
As long as we don't put the governor's plane back in here with a pilot, okay.
Mhm.
Different type of pilot.
All right,
Okay.
Okay, so we are now through all of the language except for the effective dates that was in the House language. And we're getting to some of the proposals that you have for additional language. Section 28A, this is the agency's request with respect to exempting certain land from the calculation for falling under Act 250. I believe this language is going to be looked at by Senate Natural Resources and Energy. If you have questions about Act 250, that's definitely something that my colleague, Ellen, would be better suited to answer. I can go through the language again, but I don't know if this is something that the committee wants to do anything with yet before hearing from your,
was that language sent over to Natural Resources prior? Did anybody? No,
Yes.
they have, okay.
Senator
And-
Mullen.
Yes, go ahead, Senator. Yeah.
Sorry, I've been exchanging emails with Senator Bray, and we have scheduled at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. I will be testifying to Senate Natural Resources on this topic. And I have invited, I hope I've invited, but I'm hoping Michelle Boomhauer will show up as well to make sure she corrects everything I say that's wrong. But I expect to have feedback for the committee on this for our Wednesday transportation meeting.
Okay,
That means you
Senator
aren't going to get this bill out until Wednesday then.
we were told we had to get it out Tuesday by the boss, so I don't know what we're gonna do here.
Senate Finance is also looking at the rate setting language Tuesday afternoon. That's scheduled for 2:30 PM on Tuesday.
Okay,
Well, I guess Wednesday morning we can ship it over maybe.
we'll have to, yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
My plan is to, this evening or afternoon, get you the strike all amendment with everything except for the sections that are outstanding. And then as soon as I know what you want to do with those other sections, I can update it.
This bill doesn't worry me or doesn't cause as much a complexity as some of the other ones that are out there, simply because the T bill, as we agree upon it, we pretty much accept. So it's not a matter of not like we have to do with some other bills if we're dealing with general fund or other areas. So as long as we can get just about everything. So once we get the feedback from those other two committees, we can just move it.
We should be able to wrap things up this morning, I believe, with all the other issues, so. We've got
Okay.
all morning till 11:30, so.
And the one other thing I would add there is the two sections that have gone to other committees that I'm aware of. One is session law requiring rate setting, not changing the transportation program or utilizing transportation fund dollars in any way. And then this Act 250, which is a change to codified law, also doesn't have to do with the transportation program. So I think all the money moving pieces can be resolved with these two sections still outstanding.
Okay,
Okay,
What's our next?
28B
okay,
is just a carryover. It's an additional section related to Act 250. So I think 28A and 28B are the two that you're waiting for Senate Natural on. 28C, this is a proposal from the Agency of Transportation. This is language that was not included in the House bill, nor the governor's original recommend. So it's not like the House took it out and the agency is proposing it again. But this would be having the agency work with the regional planning commissions to establish a transportation equity framework. And then a lot of the language that you're going to see here, which we went through I think 2 weeks ago, has to do with this sort of public input and outreach that is to be done. So in subsection B, in conducting the analysis required under subsection A to get to that transportation equity framework, the agency is to coordinate with the 11 RPCs, seek input from individuals who are underserved by the state's current transportation system or who may not have previously been consulted as part of the agency's planning process. And that in order to aid the agency in its work that it needs to do in developing this transportation equity framework, the 11 RPCs are required to convene regional meetings focused on achieving equity and inclusion in the transportation planning process. And the meeting facilitation and what's looked at is covered under 19 VSA section 10L, which is the statute on the regional planning commissions. And then the deliverable back to the House and Senate committees on transportation is due not later than January 15th of 2022.
That was requested by the agency, and Michelle went through it and indicated to us that the RPCs were aware of it and were prepared to undertake this work. I just want to confirm my memory.
That's my recollection, but I think Michelle can correct all of us if we are misremembering.
Okay.
Once again, Senator Kitchell is correct on this, and
please, don't start on a Friday. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
fine.
and we're actually working right now with the regional planning commissions on their contracts with us for next year, and this language has been included, so they are good.
Okay. I think we should accept it and close it out.
Okay, any issues?
I have a question
Yes, Senator Pertlick?
for Michelle. Is the Agency of Transportation using the social equity, I don't know what they're calling it. It's like a questionnaire for if you do any new program. I know that they rolled out to all agencies, state government. Are you guys already doing that, or is that kind of different from what AOT does and you're doing this kind of to do that? You know what I mean?
So-
Does that question make sense?
I do understand what you're asking, Senator Perchlik. Susanna Davis, the state's equity director, and that's not exactly her title, but the gist of it, came up with an equity analysis tool that we used to review all of our policy proposals and our budgets this year across the enterprise of state government. And the tool, while it was helpful as a first step in terms of how to approach expanding equity analyses and assuring equity inclusion, I don't know that the tool would be an appropriate framework for evaluating the entire capital program project by project or everything we do. And so we're trying to, and we're working closely with Susanna. We'll be engaging assistance both with the RPCs and a consultant to evaluate all parts of our programs and determine how we accomplish the goal within the complexity of how we develop and deliver projects and programs. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, all right,
Okay, that's good.
next.
So you're good with 28C?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, yes, Senator Chittenden.
So I'm fine with 28C, but I don't know how we, if we already glossed over this or if this is just a new item, but I was somewhat persuaded by Olivia's and Kevin's presentation and testimony yesterday regarding payment agnostic capabilities of EV, even within the grant programs. Is that on your docket of things to work through today, Anthea, or is that an additional item to raise to close out the T-bill?
So I think the places you could include it are in 18, which was the grant program for the multi-unit dwellings, which you did close out yesterday, but you could put something in there saying that for this specific iteration of the grant program, it would not require a specific payment method. You could put in session law as a new section, something that tells the agency as part of this interagency team that all of these grant programs going forward need to be silent as to a payment method. Or, and I believe this is the proposal that Kevin had in the slide deck, was actually adding it to the definition of EVSE available to the public in 30 VSA section 201. I think it would be weird to put a requirement on an agency for a grant program in the definition of equipment, because that equipment, I mean, that definition is meant to apply to just charging stations that are available to the public in general. So I think probably the session law requirement, if you want it to be broad and overarching for all of these grant offerings, that it would need to be silent on the payment method. But I think, you know, you've also heard from the agency as to why they are, I believe, not persuaded by the arguments that were made yesterday. So I think it's an outstanding discussion point, and there are a couple places to address it.
Senator Mazza,
Senator Kitchell, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if I'm thinking about this correctly. It seems like the agency was concerned about people who are of more modest income and having recognizing that they're that what they have for technology. And I'm wondering to what extent this debate is how we have one group that the policy or the goal is to do everything possible to increase the EV take-up. But then we also have, to me, this gets into kind of a social equity issue, a group of Vermonters that because of the sources of their income would be using a different method of payment. And so we perhaps have two different perspectives. One is my goal is the expansion and diffusion of EVs and be agnostic on technology, and but that could in fact have a very negative impact on certain Vermonters based on their lower incomes and source of income. I'm just wondering, are we really having the same issue? And depending on your goal or your orientation, you're going to take a different view. So I would imagine if my goal is, I would just want to get that out there, I want to be agnostic, I want to expand the fleet, that's my objective. But somebody else might say, I don't want that done at the expense or disadvantaging a group of Vermonters that are already marginalized, or there's a financial consideration here that we should not ignore. So I'm throwing that out as, is that perhaps is that an accurate characterization of the different points of view on this issue?
It's the same thing I raised yesterday as well. I mean, I share that with you, Senator Kitchell, and it's it's people on the lower economic scale as well, and it's also the older people who haven't kept up with technology.
Are you talking about me, Ross?
Well, do you have a flip? Only if you still have a flip phone.
Oh no, I don't. I'm beyond
I
that.
just got rid of mine, so.
So, I mean, I share your concern.
I was just saying, I think you very succinctly summarized the trade-offs I heard in the debate, or the discussion on this. But what I was persuaded by is, one, your comment, Senator Kitchell, and two, that chart at the end where it really showed our neighboring states that started down this path but then rescinded it, and then the overwhelming number of states that have been clearly agnostic. But I know Michelle Boomhauer spoke to this before in earlier discussion, but I feel like they came forward with those citations of peer states that I am hesitant to have Vermont be the only one that requires magnetic strip readers out in the elements on our EV stations. It just seems like a step backwards. And I'm sensitive to the arguments that are laid out in the debate here. I don't know if it's the right thing to do to say you have to have a magnetic stripe on a device in Vermont winters, weathering all of our storms.
So the one thing I'm going to chime in with, if you look at our statute, codified law, that does not require the magnetic strips. So if any of these companies wanted to go and install a charging station, they wouldn't need to have that strip reading technology in it. It really is the parameters of the grant program. And in terms of looking at what grant programs you are being asked to fund through the T-bill at this point, and I know the governor has made a recommendation for having more money go to charging stations, and maybe it would be done through a similar grant program. So I don't think you can avoid this question forever, but for the question that is in front of you now, unless you're going to change the parameters of the grant program, you could limit your discussion to, for this grant program, the $1 million for the multi-unit dwellings at affordable housing and multi-unit dwellings owned by nonprofits. Do you want to prohibit the requirement that those have the magnetic strips? So at least your question can be smaller now if you feel like this is too big of a hurdle to deal with at present.
I am supportive of that. And the reason why I am is I just think if we require these magnetic strips and they go through 1 or 2 Vermont winters, and they're in the testimony, the things that are keep corrupting and failing and just don't work, and they're at these affordable multi-unit dwellings, I feel like we have established devices that are going to more likely fail on a regular basis as part of this grant program. So I'm still open to suggested, but I'm not twisting arms. I think it's worthwhile removing this requirement for the card swipe based on the testimony yesterday.
I just look at Senator Chittenden, and I look at all the service stations that have the magnetic swipe. After we had that testimony yesterday, I went there, and there was the latest and greatest fuel station, magnetic swipe. No problems, no concerns, no nothing. I just want to be careful about how inclusive we are to the folks that just don't have what some people have. As Senator Kitchell says, we are trying on one hand to push electrification to every segment of our market. And why I just want to be careful that we're not excluding them on the most important thing that they need to do, which is to fuel their car up. And they can't do it because of their limitations. Not because they don't want to, but probably because that's the way they have to.
Yes, Senator Perchlik.
Can I ask Michelle a question on this?
You can and you may.
Okay, thank you. Well, you don't know if I can. Maybe I can.
Well, maybe you can, but you may.
Jane, you're right.
Yes, as always. My question is just how much of a iron grip does the agency have on the magnetic strip requirement? Is it something that you see as kind of flexible that you look at as installation per installation, or is it like a line in the sand? I got the impression from talking to Dan Dutcher last year or whatever it was, and in other testimony, that it's not a line in the sand. For the reasons that Senator Kitchell and Senator Ingalls gave, that you do want to have it, but it's that you're flexible on it, that as we move forward or as they break or as you get more experience, the agency could require it or not require it as in its best judgment.
Thank you, Senator Perchlik. I think in the past you've heard that the state is a part of the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, NESCOM. And NESCOM is the entity which we rely upon relative to developing guidance and standards for EV related activities. And you know, the current regional guidance that NESCOM has promulgated is the guidance we're using. You know, I understand from, you know, Senator Chittenden's concerns that some states are doing it differently, but Vermont oftentimes does it differently as well. And, you know, we just recognize that that this will be evolving, and that even though developments in payment technology have created a variety of ways to pay for things, the most common form is still credit card with a strip or a chip. If the EV driver pulls up to the charging station and they can't use their credit card and they have no other options, they don't have a smartphone or a key fob or whatever, it's going to be a negative experience. And like we were talking about, many low-income consumers use reloadable or single-use credit cards to make purchases. And if we're trying to increase EV adoption among lower-income Vermonters, making a policy goal that's not consistent with this method of payment wouldn't be that helpful. Some EV vendors have argued that the cost of credit card readers is prohibitive. However, most vendors, including Electrify America and other manufacturers, include this as a feature in their equipment, and it's actually not a very expensive technology. And many major cities have credit card readers on every single parking meter, and so those are out in the elements. You know, we continue to watch this. We're going to evolve as the market and people's technology evolves. But until then, we don't think we should be limited with our ability to impose these requirements that are more friendly to low-income Vermonters or the everyday consumer. And, you know, I think the note about skimmers was highlighted a number of times yesterday, but those are a concern already, whether you're at a gas pump, an ATM, you know, a parking meter. So I think consumers, you know, recognize there's a need. And I guess the last thing I would say is we only require these as part of grants awarded for level 3 stations, and not level 2 and below. So, you know, I think I mentioned yesterday that, or the day before when we were talking about the multi-unit dwelling grants that we're talking about here, you know, if those don't, if the proposal does not include a technology need for these types of swipe devices, then that will be articulated in, you know, in the grant process. So those are the high points from my perspective.
Okay, can I have a follow-up?
Yes, go right ahead.
I guess what I was trying to get to in my question was like specifically for this grant program, since it is in housing, I just thought there would be instances where you wouldn't really need the magnetic swipe because it's like inside the parking garage. It's not a
Yes.
public thing. It's not like just random people are going to come up and say, how do I pay? If
Yep.
you live there, you'll figure it out because you charge there on a regular basis. So I could see why the agency would maybe choose one way or the other, or for level 2 or something like that. So it's what I heard is that you will have this flexibility, that it isn't
Yes.
a strong policy, that you will look at each installation and make a determination on what the best thing is. And sometimes you may or may not require them or
Right.
these affordable housing, but you do want to follow the guidelines that NESCOM has put out.
Yes, Senator Pertrick, that's right. And
You're correct, Andy.
I'm trying to get my batting average up close to James.
You'd better mark that one on the wall.
First time.
So for the level 3 public charging stations, our policy guidance for the grant applicants is going to continue for, until we sort of see this evolving, is going to continue to be that you have to include either a chip reader or a swipe option. But you're right, for like the multi-unit dwelling, that may be a different scenario than public charging with level 3.
Okay, well, that clarification, I don't think we need a change, but I think the agency's open to evolving their position on it as facts on the ground change.
Mhm.
Senator Chittenden.
Yeah, so I think Michelle just convinced me as well. I don't think that it's required at this time, but I will say one pause I had with Michelle's argument is I never want Vermont to be different just for the sake of being different. I'm okay with Vermont exceptionalism when it makes sense, but not just for the sake of just being an outlier from our neighbors. But I'm fine with dropping the language or this discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion on this subject? All right. Okay, Anthea.
Okay, so that means that I think we can move on to section 28D. This is what Senator Ingalls brought up this morning. This is Senator Perchlik's original proposal on the space heating systems in Agency of Transportation buildings. I have circulated via email, and then I'll also put it up on the share screen, an updated proposal from Senator Perchlik. The new language is highlighted in yellow. And then I don't know, Senator Perchlik, if you want me to walk through this or if you wanted to explain your proposal.
I want to hear this again. Yeah, please.
Yeah, the amendment for today might be moot if there's not an interest in doing it, but just quickly on this amendment, I had some email exchanges with Matt Coda from the Fuel Dealers Association, who was interested in if we were going to do this to make sure that liquid renewable fuels like biodiesel would count as a renewable heating system. And I was totally fine with that. So that the amendment would make it clear that even if it's a fossil fuel system, like an oil burner or oil boiler, if they put in a burner and we're burning biodiesel, then that would count as a renewable system. So that's what the amendment does. But my original language was just setting the policy for the agency that as they replace systems starting in the future in fiscal year 23, they don't replace a lot of systems. So it's not a wholesale, every system needs to be replaced, but as a system breaks, as a system needs to be updated, as they renovate a rest area and the new heating system gets in, that the renewable energy heating system would be what they put in, unless it just does not make sense for whatever reason. There's not the space for it, or the cost is just really high because they'd have to add on to the building for storage. So they can say, in this instance, it just really doesn't make sense. But what this policy would set is that it is the policy of the state to put in a renewable systems as we're replacing these systems over the next, 30, 40 years. So I don't think it's a radical proposal because it's just as they need to do it. and they can say they can't do it, and to say, hey, these ones we
Where,
kept
where
as
where does it
possible.
say that? Where does it say they don't have to do it?
Right, because I don't see that.
It's
That
the
here shall, where,
see the exception. She highlighted it there, where the secretary can say that it's not cost prohibitive. I can't remember what the wording is there. I can't read it there. It's C. Yeah.
Financially impracticable.
Yeah. So financially practical. And when that, and that could be for various reasons. And just to Senator Ingalls' point, with all due respect, there's not a technology problem. The state is heating a lot of buildings with wood. We heat the whole Capitol complex with wood. We heat something like 70 schools with wood. We heat, large buildings are heated with wood throughout the state, and very small buildings are heated with wood throughout the state. And so there's not a technology program. In my view, it's just a will and an interest to have our actions follow our words, that one, that we are moving towards a renewable energy future, and two, that we want to have local renewable energy, that we want to use these wood systems that use local renewable fuel that is grown in our forests as a way of supporting our forest products industry, because they need a market for this wood. And Vermont has real opportunity to be leaders in this sector, together with our other northern forest states that are looking at this too. But Vermont is seen as a leader in this, and I think we can have even a greater economic benefit to the state, not only just because we're using our local fuel, but having more of the companies being grown here and having more pellet mills here and things like that has a really strong economic development benefit. But as I put in here, there's an exception to allow the AOT not to do it.
but if we're doing it now, and you say we're doing it, why do we insist or mandate they do it?
Right.
Well, it's just that this makes it top of mind. I think that this would require them to make sure that they're thinking of doing it. They do think about it. They do use the wood in their maintenance garages because they have the free cordwood. So it just kind of makes sense. And that's something they've been doing for, 100 years. So that's great. And they should continue to do that. This just make sure that they're thinking about it with every stuff. So if they do a rest area, maybe it's only 200 square feet. They might not think of, hey, do we need to do a propane system there? Like maybe we could do a pellet system. Because we have this new requirement, let's make sure a pellet system isn't the best option for this rest area. And it might not be. That they might look at it and say like, oh wow, if we keep the propane system, that's $1,000, but if we put in a pellet system, it's $20,000. We're going to say that that's not acceptable. But they might say, because we're renovating it, we're doing all these costs anyway, putting in a pellet system is only going to be, $1,000 more, and we can get a grant for that. So let's do the pellet system. So my goal is just to make sure that the agency has this as top of mind every time they look at a heating system.
Well, I think they already have that on top of the mind, and I really, really do. And to tie their hands in a way that this wording is tying their hands, I'm not in favor of that. Whether people like it or not, any study that you do, we're going to have fossil fuels for another 100 years. Yes, we're trying to get away from it, but we're doing our best to do that. But to expend more money unnecessarily when there's an easier solution sometimes is, it's just sometimes it's just the facts of life of what you have to put up with. Yes, we're trying to get there. Yes, we're trying to do it. Yes, we will try to get there. But to mandate that we do that, I can't be in favor of it. If you want to soften the language some, to say that, get rid of the shalls and musts, and I could do that. But sometimes you just have to have flexibility. You can't park a building. You can park a bus because the electrification hasn't worked, but you can't park a building. And when the heating system goes down, to go back in there and redo all of that, it's costly. I mean, we see it in the capital budget all the time, just replacing HVAC systems, how costly it is. I mean, sometimes it seems like you can build a whole brand new building for what it's going to cost to change the heating system over. for inefficiency or what it does or doesn't do. But and I think we have to be careful mandating how we're going to let these people do what they do best.
What if we're in a situation where we rent space? For example, right now AOT has moved over to Barry. And if they were to rent space in the future, would it force them to go only to a place that burns wood or pellets? Or could they rent from a place that heats with gas or propane or whatever? How would that determine that?
Now, the intent is only for buildings that they own and control. So they don't own the building in Barry, so they have no control over the heating system. So it's only when they have control of the building and have control of the heating system that they would have to put in the renewable system. And it's not, they have to put in a renewable system. It's just like, that's the priority, but they can say, you know, the replacement costs aren't acceptable. We can't do it here. So they don't have to do it. So there is flexibility in them and saying, in this instance, there is no renewable energy option that really is a good option. So we're not going to do it. And that's in there. They just have to tell us what it is that they just let us know the next year. Like, we know renewable energy is the priority, but in this, whatever it is, in this airport hangar in Newport, it just didn't make sense because we don't have the space, because we can't encroach on the airstrip. So we're not going to do it. And we would look at that and we'd say, yeah, that makes sense. That we didn't want you to do it in places where it didn't make complete sense. We just want to make sure that they are doing it where it can make sense.
Senator Chittenden?
You got a priority statement.
Go ahead. Yep.
So I like the softer language, but this language in your comments just now, Senator Perch, like, it's reminiscent of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. And I'm worried that this language is just telling us to do what we're already doing. And I'm curious, does BGS, Buildings and Ground Services, already have policies that require us to do this? And is this some of that language that makes Senator Kitchell have a visceral reaction?
Oh,
If I can answer that,
Yeah, go
I do
ahead.
not feel like it's repetitive. It's because there isn't language that says that this is the goal. We have plans to say that we're going to switch to renewable energy. We have goals to switch to renewable energy, but there's nowhere where it's specific like this. I mean, I would like BGS to have this kind of language, and I introduced a bill that was in institutions to kind of do something like this that didn't go anywhere. But the agency does do some wood stuff, and they are saying that they want to do more wood stuff. So, but this just makes clear that what the state's policy is. So I don't think it's like the rail trail, because that was, saying, that you shall maintain it, and they're already maintaining it, and they're required to do that. So this is different than that, I think.
Yes, Anthea?
One thing just pointing out, because it's not obvious from the language because something has been removed, but in Senator Perchlik's proposal, there also used to be a definition. It would be at the end of line 20 for what was financially impracticable. Instead, that is no longer being defined, but for purposes of reporting back on an exemption, if the secretary issues one for a heating system, it would be the basis of each exemption. So I think if you are comparing the original proposal from Senator Perchlik and the second one, there is a less narrow, this is what financially impracticable means. So that's a language change.
We just need to go down through this bill from top to bottom. Or this amendment. I'm sorry, but we have to. And if you could put it up, if we could go through it, because I'm just not comfortable with any of it. So I apologize to take the time of the committee, but if we could look at it.
Okay, so what you have in terms of old language, new language, all combined, it is defining a fossil fuel space heating system as any space heating system that isn't a non-fossil fuel space heating system. And then you are defining in subdivision A2, a non-fossil fuel space heating system as a space heating system that is not designed to utilize fossil fuels or that exclusively utilizes renewable liquid fuel. So those are the two paths to falling under the definition of non-fossil fuel space heating system. In subsection B, this is where you're getting that except as provided in subsection C, which is the exemption route. Beginning in fiscal year 2023, the agency shall only install those non-fossil fuel space heating systems as the primary heating source in buildings that are owned or controlled by the agency. Subsection C, this is your exemption. This is when you wouldn't need to fall under subsection B. The Secretary of Transportation, may provide a written exemption to the replacement required under subsection B if the Secretary determines that it is financially impracticable to install a non-fossil fuel space heating system as the primary heating source.
Who does
So-
who does the secretary report to?
The reporting is done in subsection E, where on or before January 15th in each year, the Secretary needs to submit a report to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation with the basis of each exemption that was provided under subsection C and any fossil fuel heating systems that were installed in the previous calendar year. So exemption is not then reviewed, it's reported back to your committee and your counterparts in the House.
Could we go back to the exception? Exemptions. This only has a financially impractical, but there might be times where structurally it's impractical because of I don't know.
Right.
There might be just physical limitations. So I just think that maybe financially impractical is a little too limiting, because it might be because for the design of the building or the nature of the building or whatever, it's from a structural perspective impractical. So I was just wanting to raise that as having that as the only criteria.
And it just seems like one more burden that the commissioner has to do to prepare this report, to make, to micromanage, to be micromanaged to why they made that decision. And to have a report to come back to the Senate and the House and to be second questioned and guessed as far as to why they made that decision, when that was totally in their rights to make that decision, because that's why we hired them to do their jobs.
Yes. Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, to Senator Kitchell's point, that's why I took out we had a definition of that, financial impractical. That was clear that it was just about finances, but I took that out because your example, let's say there's just not enough structure, so that they would have to add a structure. That would be a cost or they'd have to buy land. So anything kind of comes down to a cost, because, basically anything is possible. If you were like bought land or built a new building or, did something kind of crazy. So I think within being financially impractical, it makes sense, because the finance is what's limiting it, even though there is something like we don't have a space in the building, or because let's say there's a building that we're going to put a new heating system in, but we know we're going to tear this building down in 5 years. Well, that would be, a financial issue, because you're not too costly to put it in today. Maybe the cost is equal to a fossil fuel system, but it doesn't make sense financially to do it because you're going to tear it down or something like that. So I think within that undefined thing, that gives the agency the flexibility to basically say whatever reason they have to not do it, other than just saying, we don't like wood chips, or we don't like the smell of wood chips, or, something like that. Or, we don't want to cut down trees. If they can't use reasons like that, but they could use any other reason that's prohibiting it. Doesn't make sense to install that system there. And I think we're not second guessing them. We're just saying, let us know why you're making these decisions. And I think that's totally within our role as the legislative body overseeing what the agency is doing. I mean, if we didn't second guess anything, I don't know why we get these big white books of their budget. Why?
I just think there's more important things to second guess, Senator Perchlik, than this. It's just micromanaging. It's what it is.
Yeah,
We'll
we
be,
disagree
we'll be
on
putting in language about electric trucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you must.
We do that.
If you
Right.
want to do that, I would be supportive of that.
I know you
We
would.
can disagree on this point of whether this is a priority or not. I'm just putting it forward as a priority of mine and for my constituents. And if you don't like it, then don't vote for it.
Okay, that's good. All right, Senator Kitchell.
Well, it seems like we're talking about what should be a state policy relative to fuel types. And this has got into my earlier comment, and that is, shouldn't this be a discussion where we're having a universal policy for all state-owned properties, whether it be transportation or any? It's just, it seems
State buildings owned
it seems like it begs the larger discussion around these fuel systems for anything that the state's doing, whether regardless of agency. So I'm raising that again in terms of, is this really, when we set the standard, and I'm thinking, well, we did this really when we went in and looked at the fleet, the BGS fleet.
Right.
And we set forth a policy relative to the acquisition or the purchases of new vehicles. So it did, to me, what is being proposed here is analogous in many ways to what the policy statement that we made guiding BGS as they went and procured new vehicles. And so this would be our policy relative to the procurement of new heating systems. So I see, maybe I'm wrong, but I see that as really, this is an analogous discussion around a policy statement. So I just bring that up as something that we have done in the past. But of course, EVs were purchased, well, it was really the BGS fleet that we were addressing. So anyway, that's
Okay, just so,
one question I would raise.
okay, so I guess the issue is whether it's in or out. Someone want to move on that, or I think we've had our discussion.
I would move that we take it out.
Okay. Okay.
Is this, I wanted to say, rather than, is this something, and we haven't heard from Michelle, so I don't know what the agency's view is.
Michelle,
mean-
would you like to add some comments on this one?
What I would offer to the committee is the agency is agnostic on the direction that you determined to take. You know, we have testified to and committed to the fact that we are evaluating our heating systems as we replace them. We strive to have as efficient a possible systems, and we reflect that in our contributions to the state energy plan document every 2 years. And we talked with Senator Perchlik after our more recent testimony recently about changing our performance monitoring of our fuels consumptions across heating sector. And we also do it on the vehicle side to better reflect how we're doing in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from both heating and transportation use. So we can live with whatever decision the committee comes up with.
Is it possible to get something in the middle ground? Maybe this is the third item to put on our letter of intent that really reflects what you're talking about, Michelle, but you know, an intent to look at the replacement of heating systems and how they can be evaluated. So rather than putting it into the Green Book, it sounds like in some ways what you're thinking and is along toward the same lines as what the Senator Perchlik is doing. I'm just wondering if we could articulate a desire to have the agency explore when they are doing the replacements, how these replacements, what?
Are we talking about state buildings? It should be something around the whole thing. We got millions of square feet of state building space. Shouldn't it be a discussion about the whole thing, everybody?
I don't know. I was thinking about that. We didn't do that for EV. We just did it for the fleet. We didn't do it for, the state police. We didn't do it for other parts of the vehicle fleet, fish and wildlife. So we didn't, I was thinking about that, my earlier comment, but in fact, that policy statement was not universal in its directive. But, this would not obligate him. It's just an alternative of moving the discussion forward without going to the point that I think Senator Ingalls is concerned about, and that is being that prescriptive in the bill.
And I know that there's, some said flexibility in it, which I don't really agree that there is, but I know what Senator Pertlick's trying to get at, that they must not do that. But heating systems break, and there's just sometimes you just got to go in and fix them, and you just don't have a long time to sit there and determine when your employees are freezing, or you have to even talk about relocating every employee out of that building to fix that system. You just have to go in there and have the flexibility to fix that system as best you can and not have to face the music for it a year later when somebody's questioning, well, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that? I just think that there's other things that we have better time to manage than micromanaging those decisions.
Okay, where do we stand? Senator Pertlick?
Well, that example that Senator Engel gave would be perfectly good example to not do a system. That would be a reason why they'd say we can't do a renewable system because we got to do it today. But that aside, I'm supportive of Senator Kitchell's idea if it's the will of the committee to move it to a letter of intent, just to emphasize it for the agency. But I just have a question, for Mazza and Kitchell that have been around longer. Where would this larger policy discussion have? If it's not in transportation, who deals with transportation buildings, then what committee would you suggest I bring this to next time?
It really belongs in institutions that has jurisdiction over all the state buildings.
But they don't have jurisdiction
Over other than transportation, but so we could reconcile at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the issue is this out or in?
Well, I don't know, my proposal was perhaps not to remove the language from the T-bill itself and make reference to the desire for the agency when they're considering the procurement of a new system, that they evaluate, these options and the way in which the state, in doing its business, supports other local, the local economy. So I think we could come up with some language, and our letter would now have three things. It would have Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. It would have this, and what was the other thing that
Bike corridors.
So
Pardon me?
Bike corridors.
Oh, the bike corridors, yeah. Mhm.
So we're assuming they're not doing that presently. Is that correct?
What? Not doing what?
Not
We don't-
looking at
we
all
don't have a
personnel.
We don't have a
Michelle
stated
is-
policy on it.
Well, Michelle has told us that that they are doing that now, that they are looking at all sources. When they're evaluating they're evaluating these systems.
Well, that's why I thought the letter intent it really reinforces, and the same thing could be said about the other two pieces of the letter. But it doesn't put it officially into the green books, that's all. And, but it seems like it's just a reinforcement, and I don't see it as a bad policy statement. I know we've gone through this whole debate about, trying to create a market for our wood products, which frankly, in our area in Orange County is a tremendous problem. There's, we've got more low-grade forest products, and we've got a market for, and so it's something that we've talked about. That was part of why we wanted the Rygate plant to continue, because of the fact that it's a market. So I don't see this discussion as, without connections to other discussions that we've had. So I would think that maybe a good balance on this is just make reference to the discussion and the desire to look at when you're making these procurement decisions, and put it in a letter, and not put it in the official T-bill itself.
I would go with that.
May I ask a new guy question?
Yes, go ahead.
Is
You're
it
not a new guy. You can't keep.
Yeah, okay, how long are you gonna play that anyway?
another month or two? Is it common practice for letters of intent from Transportation Committee to?
No, it's
No.
not.
We're
It's
starting, we're going down a new road here.
Well, the second part is to like institutions, to stress to institutions that we really think this should be taken up. Or Senator Perch, like, I want this policy to be taken up by institutions so that they can comprehensively go through this, and then maybe VTrans can adopt and conform to what they're suggesting. Because the other thing that I was going to raise really quick is there are quality of life concerns with wood chip burners. In South Burlington, we tried to put in a wood chip burner at our school. All the neighbors didn't want all that smoke to go into their houses. And so I'm not seeing that in the exceptions, but I would love to see institutions tackle this and come up with really comprehensive policy for statewide governance decision-making on this.
A few years ago, we had it at schools. We're going to mandate schools to put wood chips or pellets or whatever. Not mandate, but that was the idea. We gave school construction loans, and I remember one school in my district, when they got into it, they found they had to have a huge building to put the wood chips in, and they couldn't afford that. So that went out the window. So every case is different naturally. And my fear is we're going that direction anyway. And I just hate to put mandates and deadlines of when you have to do it. To me, it doesn't, we're making a lot of progress, but boy, you got to be careful how much mandate you put into something for the cost.
You just have to be careful about what those mandates cost when you're taking monies away from other parts of the state, when you're already in budgets that are already stretched to the limits. You have to be careful about what you're spending monies on when other parts of the state need that money and other segments of it.
Okay, so what's the proposal before us now? What do we want to do here?
And you don't necessarily even have to call it a letter of intent. You can write a letter. We've done that before. We did it with immunizations from appropriations to the Department of Health. So it's a way of formal communication that, this was discussed. And
I was comfortable with the way that Michelle described what they're doing already. I was comfortable with that language. And if that's what the language could be on a letter, whether it's a letter of intent, but outside of this bill, I would go with that they seek to find other ways other than fossil fuels, and or the language that Michelle used, I liked.
So what do I set? Do you want to vote on it, or you want to, what's the consensus of the committee at this point? We got to get this behind us.
Well, if we got to vote on it, I want to vote it out. I would like to vote it out of the bill and vote that we have a letter to the satisfaction of the other committee members. As Senator Kitchell has stated.
Okay, anybody for it, against it?
well, I'm for it, my own suggestion. So I guess I need to say I'm for it.
Senator Chittenden?
I support what Senator Ingles just said. Is this a formal vote where I need to record things? How is this working?
No.
No. I'm going to say no to both proposals. I think it's being done now, and I'm opposed to either the letter or the language at this time. So, okay. All right, let's move on. Go ahead, Anthea.
Okay, so you are, for purposes of this bill, removing section 28D. That means that you are now finished with all of the language that is in the side-by-side, except for the effective dates. And the things that I will point out with the effective dates is subsection A will get deleted because you deleted subsection 2, so there's nothing about the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail anymore. And then section 3, which is the repeal of the Route 4 permit, that I'm going to change to take effect on January 1 of 2022 per the discussion yesterday.
Yep.
So those are the changes that you'll see to the effective dates. There might be one other subsection that is specifically called out with the different effective dates in this section, but you haven't seen that language yet. It was the thing I was going to turn to next.
Well, what about the effective date for the program that's going to run out of money, Mileage Smart?
Yeah, so that language, and let me pull up. That is an excellent point. I have it in the language for those two authorizations that they're available for fiscal year 21 and 2022. But you're right, I need to make those two sections effective on passage. I will include that in the strike all amendment.
It was brought to my attention yesterday by someone, I won't say who, but they said it's comical if you went to Woodstock and you had a tractor trailer and you went across the center line, the white line, whatever they're saying, that you went across the intersection, and if you were stopping, you showed them a permit, and they'd say, "Okay, go right ahead." But if you didn't have a permit, here's a fine. So it's all right. If you had the permit that you paid, it was fine to go across the line. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, so thank you, Senator Kitchell, for flagging that. I will include that in the effective dates. And then if the committee would like to, there is an additional proposal from the Agency of Transportation with regards to what would happen if there was federal infrastructure funding that became available before you were all back in session next year, and giving authorization to the agency to spend some of that money and up to $2 million in transportation fund money. So this was new language to you, Senator Kitchell. I believe this was talked about at a meeting, because I know I've seen correspondence from Chris about maybe amending this slightly. So I don't know what direction the committee would like to go to in terms of discussing this, but it's an agency proposal that came in very recently.
Well, it gets into the role of the legislature, and under a constitution, funds are appropriate, have to be appropriated. There is obviously, if a separate grant comes in, we approve it through joint fiscal, but other times they flow through existing DEPT IDs to agencies or departments. And so with the prospect of reauthorization of the FAST Act, which I assume is the genesis, but maybe the slug of federal money coming in the fall for infrastructure, it raised the question around how we as a legislature want to have any involvement with those dollars that are flowing to the state. And the language, I believe, has, as Anthea said, would authorize up to $2 million of transportation fund dollars to serve as match. And so conveying the concern that has come to me as appropriations chair from other members of the legislature, and that is, well, how does the legislature have any involvement with the disbursement of millions and millions of dollars? And so one of the thoughts I had on this, knowing that we don't want to constipate the process, as one might say, would be to have whatever comes down. And I think the language provides for already identified projects that we have some review by, and Senator Mazza's left, but and he's a member of what is the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, JITOC, it's called. So that was my thought, is that would be a way of the agency connecting back to the legislature with their proposals around how these millions of dollars would be going out. So that, but Senator Mazza's, so what I'm asking is we consider putting in that amendment if we want to give that authority to the agency, that we have some connection to a joint transportation oversight committee, at least to report on how that money, what it is and what projects it's funding. And I don't think that that's out of line, because I think that certainly as a matter of practice, the agency touches base with the chair, but this would be because it really involves the appropriation of state dollars, transportation dollars, that that there should be some recognized and formalized legislative oversight of what where that money will be going out and for what.
How much are we talking about here? How much was it?
We don't know. It could be millions of dollars.
Okay, we don't know.
I would imagine it as many millions of dollars, depending on how the money flows and
That's
what
the
comes in.
infrastructure bill, you mean?
This is both the reauthorization of the FAST Act
Yeah.
that's coming up,
Yeah.
which could mean a lot more money, and the infrastructure bill,
Right.
which generally transportation infrastructure is one of the key components. So I think the potential is millions and millions of dollars that could flow to the agency. And that's why I feel that we should not leave it to an informal process of, and which oftentimes I would always say, have you checked with Senator Mazza? And usually the answer is yes. But I do think in this case, considering the magnitude of the funding and the uncertainty, that we should insert the role of the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, which does include, I believe, transportation, appropriations, and probably finance.
And it's, Jane, is that both in the House and the Senate? So the two money chairs? And
It's a
then-
joint, it's joint, it's
Right.
joint. It's just like joint fiscal, only it's for transportation.
It's,
And
but
it rarely meets.
it's the same membership of joint fiscal except for the transportation chairs.
No, it's just chairs. It's not, joint fiscal has more than chairs.
Okay. I know, I think that was a question, and I know we had brought up waterfall the other day, but I know we're not using that language, but I think it is something that I'd like to see in there, that we still have, that the legislature still has its role in that funding.
Yeah, it's appropriations, transportation, and your tax committees. So, chairs. So I would say if we want to continue, if we want to give this authorization to the agency in anticipation of future federal action, that we just have that provision that the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee would, we can insert it, would the plan and the projects to be funded would be submitted. And then the committee could decide whether they want to meet and have further discussion and understanding. JITOC cannot appropriate, JTOC can't appropriate, nor can joint fiscal. You can review, and you could express concern and say, we don't see that as maybe something we want to move forward, or we could say absolutely makes sense and we're comfortable with it all. But it just provides the opportunity for that legislative role.
I think that's good. And I'm assuming Anthea could work that language.
And I would say that it's consistent with what we do with all the other areas of flowing into the state.
Senator Mazza.
Yep, go right ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. This has been a really helpful conversation, and I appreciate Senator Kitchell's suggested addition. I think if former CFO Lenny LeBlanc had been available to help us craft this language, you probably would have seen that in there. And we're more than happy to to have you entertain that amendment. We were simply trying to come up with a mechanism whereby we would not have to wait until January should resources become available and there was the capacity to continue to advance activities, because we are, everything we're hearing from the federal delegation staff is that the infrastructure bill is going to move this summer. And then, of course, reauthorization is expected to move expeditiously in the fall. So having this mechanism to communicate with you about how we'd like to advance things would be really helpful.
And since I'm always going to go back to language and sharing language, I think probably the direction that this amendment is going into is fleshing out what was subsection C in the agency's proposal, which does require the prompt reporting of it to a number of committees, including JTAC when the General Assembly is not in session, but providing a bit more on what JTAC's role is, less just a passive recipient and more what JTAC can do with regards to that reporting.
Okay.
And then while the committee is
And maybe
focusing-
Chris Roop could help kind of help flesh that language out a little bit.
And then while the committee is focusing on this language, this would go into effect on passage. And as it's been proposed by the agency, in this language, subsections A and B shall continue in effect until February 1 of 2022. I don't know if that's the date that the committee would like it to continue in effect until. You could have it and earlier if you wanted it to stop sort of at the moment you're all back in the building.
Yeah.
Virtual or otherwise.
That's right, because we'd be in session and anything would be done.
Yeah, so the reporting would still go to the House and Senate committees, either committees on transportation either way. But at that point, maybe you would want it to not sort of flow through this alternative process. You would want it to remain in effect until January 15th, for example.
This is sort of a trade-off on expediency. There are times when joint fiscal actually meets when we're in session because we can move it forward. The committee and the full process is a little more time consuming. So I would not want to close that off earlier because there may be some other activities that you would want to review and have them move forward, and you short of going through the whole appropriations process, through the whole T-bill process or whatever, or separate legislation, frankly. The one thing about the transportation, which is somewhat unique, oftentimes with other funding, you really have to set up the parameters of your program and how it's going to work, et cetera. We got that was, for example, the business grants. That was a topic of a lot of discussion, and how you prioritize and what are the eligibility requirements, et cetera. Transportation projects is already such a structured process and prioritization and so forth that it doesn't create kind of the same issues and it does maybe with other areas of spending. So I don't see any problem leaving it in February because it just gives some time for that flexibility before we can really get moving on legislation.
I will say that February date is consistent with when you included virtually identical language to this in the 2018 T-bill.
Oh, well then, geez.
The JTAC language in subsection C is also, I believe, identical to what you included in 2018. So you are probably having some of the same conversation you had a few years ago.
Takes us a long time to change.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's why February makes sense. January 15th is really a little early in the process.
Okay, so it sounds like my marching orders are to keep this as it is, flesh out subsection C to have more clarity on the role of JTOC in this within its existence in codified law. I'll run that language by Chris and the rest of the folks over at JFO, and then I will circulate that to the committee as part of the proposed strike all amendment, so you can actually see the language in advance of when you're back on Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the only outstanding pieces that you have to talk about, aside from those two sections that are with your colleagues in Senate Natural and Senate Finance, is going to be looking at the summary section, which will be included in the strike all amendment, and that'll reflect the rest of the bill. I believe you still have, I have a note that you're circling back to, the $3 million that may or may not go to municipalities and in what form. That was Town Highway 8 and what passed the House. I know you were talking about maybe having it go to both of the structures, and the Roadway 2 program, I have language written up that would do that. And then once you close out that money piece, I believe the only other outstanding issue is the maintenance budget and using that for the swaps. And right now, if you keep the 3 million going to the municipalities in one form or another, you would be up 150,000 over the House in terms of what you need your swap to be, because you increased Mileage Smart from 600,000 to 750. So
Right.
instead of the swap being 4.775 million, it would be just under 5 million.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
let's
think
discuss
decide the
that,
town, and then you can decide the maintenance.
Okay, let's discuss that 3 million, see if we can't come to some consensus this morning. I know we've had a discussion about leaving it 3 million, splitting it up, divvying it up. Where do we stand at this point? Let's refresh our memories here. We had discussion on both sides, so I think we just have to make a decision one way or the other.
Senator
Well-
Mazza,
Yes, Michelle, go right ahead. Thank you.
excuse me, Senator Kitchell.
Mhm.
I did have staff pull together more details about awards that have been made over time. I know that the League of Cities and Towns had testified about concerns that towns are not getting awards in a timely manner, et cetera. And so I have some data relative to applications made and awards given. And I don't know if you want to, you can think about whether you want to review that. I can have it posted online and then I can bring it up on the screen. Well, I don't know if I may have to have Anthea bring it up on the screen because my screen has got an issue today, I think.
Michelle, we're having problems posting just because Liz isn't here and she has access to that. But if you email it to me, I could do a share
Yeah.
screen.
So I'll let you decide how you'd like to proceed.
Senator Madden?
Yes, go right ahead.
I'm interested to see that data, but I don't think it's going to weigh in one way or the other. I mean,
No.
the way I thought we were at was well, I guess that's what I proposed. I don't know what the rest of the committee thought, I guess, but I thought keeping the 3 million and doing 2, but not having it go to the towns at the pro rata formula, but go to structures, 2 million to structures, 1 million to the class 2 grants. That was my proposal, but I don't have a iron grip on that. I'm willing to, if people have a better idea.
And I have that language if you would like to see what it looks like. This has been run by Chris over at JFO, and Michelle has seen it. And then you would need to deal with the appropriation and the one-time piece. But it's saying that within the Agencies of Transportation's proposed fiscal year 2022 transportation program for these two programs, collective spending between the two programs is amended by increasing the total authorization for the two programs combined by 3 million in one-time transportation fund monies. The agency shall determine, based on municipal need, how to distribute the increased authorization between the two programs.
I like that because it gave the flexibility as opposed to a rigid split between the two. So, which we also talked about. But our first decision is not to use it for, it's to use it for structures and road, class 2 roadway, which I feel is more strategic in and I understand why the league would want to have, they have to represent all towns, and therefore they're gonna want to have it the other way. But I think if we really are saying we want to use this money in the most strategic way to benefit the overall long-term condition of our transportation infrastructure, then it lends itself to doing it for a project-based approach.
Is there any
And
idea
so-
how many towns would get it on the structures? How many towns would benefit?
Well,
If
obviously,
we were to do it tomorrow morning, for example, how many towns would you think it would benefit? 50, 10, 100? Anybody have any idea?
Senator Mazza, this is Michelle. It really depends on what the requested amount per town is. I mean, they can go up to 175,000 on the Town Highway Structures Program, but you'll see, and we'll see if somebody can mail you the list. But sometimes a community will only ask for what they need, and that could be lower than 175,000. But so the typical request ranges anywhere from, say, 75,000 up to 175,000. I would say that we would have, possibly up to 35 communities benefiting from this $3 million. But that's just, it's hard to tell.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we have 200 communities better than would get nothing then out of this.
well, they would get the standard. It's sort of like,
Understand, yeah, right.
it's sort of like business grants.
What's the standard? Is that the
Well,
The formula.
formula? Okay.
The
The
27
formula based on the towns of miles, the town highway miles. And is that, okay,
The chart that was passed out, I don't know if you have it, that chart,
yeah, I do, yep.
and they would stay the same 27 million as it was a year ago,
Mhm.
with no
Yeah.
increase. So
Right.
I can see why it's going to be a hot discussion, because towns are going to say, look, out of that 3 million, we get nothing. And then, not that I'm opposed one way or the other, but I'm just saying that's what the argument's going to be. You're going to have over 200 towns that say, I got nothing.
I guess I would just remind the committee that because we didn't make awards last year, we paused for the pandemic. We're making over $15 million in awards this year in between town highway structures and town highway class 2. So this would be another 3 million on top of that 15 million.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then on top of that, we're going to have more federal money coming in, and hopefully some of that money will be monies that we can implement within communities as well. So
that changes the picture big time, because I didn't
Well-
realize we got to carry forward.
Not only that, the towns are getting directly 176 million
Right.
from ARPA. And I think, I don't remember if it was Senator Ingalls or Senator Chittenden, but obviously if we have 15 million plus an additional 3, it really moves everybody up in line. So there's benefit overall, because it then means that your wait in line becomes much shorter, even if you might not fall into this particular, or with the additional money coming in. So it's not as, I don't, you can say, well, not every town gets it, but maybe you could, perhaps the counter argument is, well, it means that every town will be getting an opportunity for this at a much faster pace than would otherwise have been the case.
Right.
But I wasn't aware that there's from last year they were canceled. I didn't know that's there. So
And last year they canceled and added 7 million to make up for that. Is that correct, Michelle?
yeah, I think that's essentially it, because the total is just over 15 million. So
Yeah.
So to refresh your memory, and for those of you who weren't here, last year, the 2 programs were paused, but then in the September T-bill and the language for the budget bill, it was increased for town highway aid by 7 million. So that was one time, similar to the approach that the House proposed with the 3 million one-time increase to town highway aid. And if you want to see the increase in the structures in the roadway 2 program for purposes of the proposed transportation program. I can pull those pages up from the white book, but remember, because you adopt the governor's recommend, except how you change it for purposes of that entire white binder, because the agency and the governor have recommended increasing that this year to make up for the pause, that is adopted through section 1. So you are going with that recommend on the increase for those 2 programs, whether or not you add this additional 3 million or not, provided that you don't change those sections themselves.
So the town highway grant program was 27 million.
Town highway aid was 27 million, and that is sticking with what is required under the statutory formula, given the comparison of the 2 most closed fiscal years. If Lenny was here, he'd be very excited that if you neither add nor delete from town highway aid, the notwithstanding language that is always in the big bill does not need to be in E915. So you are doing what the statute says if you go with the governor's recommend on the town highway aid.
Thank you. Okay, that puts another spin in it. All right.
So where that $3 million is now, is it like what Senator Perchlik said, it's $2 million and then $1 million, with $1 million being the grant program where they can go at $175,000 per request? Or, I'm sorry, I just don't want to get lost in my numbers to know what I'm voting with.
That's okay.
Oh.
So if you go with the House proposal, it's 3 million to town highway aid divided up by the apportionment formula based on mileage. If you go
Yes.
with the language that I just put up, it is 3 million to both of the programs together. The agency would decide how that's divvied up. Maybe it's 1.5 million to each, maybe it's 1 million to one and 2 million to the other. And those programs, one of them has a statutory cap of 175,000, and the other program typically follows with that $175,000 cap. One of the House proposals that you have deleted earlier in your discussions was to increase that cap to 200,000. So if every grant request is at the statutory cap, it would be 3 million divided by 175. So this is when Representative Lanford was talking about her spreading the peanut butter and making the pot of peanut butter bigger. That was to account for the fact that they were going to increase the grant cap. This committee has decided in its strike all amendment to remove that language.
And the difference between the $7 million last year and what we're doing this year with the 3 million is last year we didn't have to make that decision. The 7 million was just added to the road grants based on mileage of town highways.
Last year, the decision was made to pause the structures and the roadway program and to have instead $7 million go out under the apportionment formulas.
Okay, I'm clear. Thank you very much. Sometimes it takes a little bit.
Well, you weren't here last year. You don't have the luxury of your own memory on this.
Senator Ingalls, I'm right there with you. May I ask a follow-up question?
Ed,
So just to be clear in my mind, and Senator Perchik was being very patient with me the other day on this, but this $3 million, if we shift it to give the VTrans more flexibility, which I'm leaning towards from what little I know about this, there is still a chunk of money in the budget that is being apportioned out based on the mileage
Yeah.
calculations. Okay.
Yeah.
27 million, which is the
27
amount
million,
required
right.
under statute.
Right.
so the agency will get all the burden. They'll catch hell if they don't get their money. They're making the decision, the final decision. Is that correct, Michelle?
Yes, Senator, you are correct. And that is how the language Anthea just reviewed is structured. And so we would be left with the burden of
Why, do you want that, or you want the decision to be made for you?
no, I think having the flexibility, given the vast amount of funding that's going out this year, towns are going to be catching up. I think it's helpful to be able to have the flexibility to look at the big picture for both these programs, look at it statewide, and understand, where the need remains, and then what's coming forward.
Is there any thought to, I heard 175 at 200. Is there any thought from 175 to 150 to distribute it further? Is that a thought? No?
Well, it'll be based on the applications we receive from the towns for what they need to do. And not every town asks for the full amount.
Okay.
So that can have an impact on things as well.
What's the request process? They get a percentage of the total project cost?
Yes, so they get up to 175,000. So if they have a $4 million project, they can only get us 175,000.
But what if the project's 300,000?
If it's 300,000, they can ask for 175.
Yeah, it's shared.
But so even if the project was 200,000, they still could ask for 175?
They could.
Wow.
Um,
So there's no percentage then. There's no a fixed number that a piece of it comes from the state and the rest they have to come up with. So
yeah, it's
Oh.
different than other programs in
yeah.
that regard. I think it's trying to recognize that these towns have roadways that are used by folks outside of their community. A class 2 road might interconnect a few communities or a major bridge. And, they might not have the community resources from their tax base to be able to handle the transportation network needs. And so it's just trying to provide some base level of guarantee that there's support for them.
And
the
if someone
best-
asked for 175, and the project costs 175, it wouldn't cost the town anything.
I have to say, it's been a while since I've looked at that grant guidance. So
Yeah, all right.
I'm afraid I don't want to make a commitment to you on that.
That sounds kind of,
But is it a one or all, Michelle? Is it 175, a $200,000 project and 175 or nothing? Or you have
No.
the flexibility to say, well, you know what? No, we're going to give you 75,000. Do you have that flexibility?
Well, now that we're deep into this in the weeds and I don't have Joel here with me, I'm going to try and bring up the grant guidance so I can speak properly on this.
Senator Kitchell, you got a-
Michelle, I just chatted to you what I think it is.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Anthea.
Yeah, I think it's page 32 of the Orange Book, and it's the 30%, 20% match depending on adoption of codes.
Oh.
Ah,
so that's
see,
come up with
there's a rhyme and a reason here. Of course there is.
Okay, so they don't get the whole load paid. They have to come up with some percentage.
Mhm,
All right.
yeah.
That-
Skin in the game.
Yeah.
Up to a maximum. Your comment, Michelle, brings a very good example where multiple towns, how that impacts. And I think about a number of years ago when we had our local government day, and a selectman, it wasn't Senator Perchlik from Marshfield, talked about the road between Marshfield and Cabot.
Yep.
Most of that road was in the town of Marshfield, but all the economic benefit and all the traffic was generated by Cabot Creamery.
Sure.
And so a relatively poor town really had no capacity, nor was it in their did they get any financial benefit for that road improvement? So in that case, AOT came in and there was a way of assisting, recognizing that reality that oftentimes the town that has the greatest cost and actually is just a transit piece to another town that does have the business and the economic benefit. So to me, that's the other advantage. You can say town by town, but it doesn't demand and cost and usage sometimes doesn't lend itself very well to what falls into an individual town and and what the burden might be. So I'm glad you brought that up because it raised that very, very issue as it related to those heavy trucks going into Cabot Creamery using, and if you just said, well, that's Marshfield's road, that's Marshfield's problem. What is Marshfield's, they're getting all the economic impact, but none of the gain. So I just thought that was a very important dimension to bring up here.
Well, in our district as well, Senator Kitchell, in my district, the Casella landfill up there where we're getting 70 trucks a day, coming through and pounding up on those roads. I mean, they're going to get there and they're going to travel those roads.
We're giving you all our trash. What more do you want? You know? Jeez.
Thank you. I forgot to thank you for that.
Okay,
Yeah,
so what do we
But
want
we're
to do on this?
sending our phosphorus to you in
Yeah,
Lake
that's right.
Champlain.
Yeah, you get the methane or whatever you get there.
We're gonna send it back over though.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so where are we on this, this split here? Are we have
Um,
come to
I
some
like the
conclusion?
amendment because it gives the flexibility. It doesn't prejudge what is the right delineation. And I like it because I just see it advances in a more strategic way, the improvement to our overall transportation infrastructure. So I like the amendment as it's written.
Senator Chittenden, I think your fingers are up there.
The thumb finger, yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so is this issue resolved?
It is for me.
Okay, go for it. Thank you, Anthea. That's it on that one. Okay.
Okay, we'll go with that updated language. So now I think the only thing left, and I'm glad that Chris has joined us because he can make sure all of the math is correct, is in the highway maintenance, and I will put this up on the screen. The change is going to be where the House had a reduction of $4,775,000. It will be an increase in state funds by $4,775,000 plus $150,000. And then the federal will be an increase by that amount plus $150,000. So you'll be using that money from the December bill, the federal highway aid money that the agency was proposing to split between 2 years. In essence, you are using some of what the agency was proposing for fiscal year 23, using an additional 150,000 of
And you
that.
know, with all the federal money that's going to come to the agency, that I bet 150,000 is going to be like bug dust.
Okay,
You're
so I'm
laughing.
I like that expression.
okay, so I'm gonna do this math and make sure I get it right. Okay, so I think that you will then have this number be 925 and this number be 92.
So as I understand correctly, we have completed everything and we'll get the final draft Tuesday. By then, I think, is that correct, Anthea? Would we have it available Tuesday?
Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna finish the strike all amendment today,
Yeah.
leaving open those 2 sections, or actually it's 3 sections because there are 2 Act 250 sections. And I'll highlight them in green or
Yeah.
some other color. I will
Okay.
get that to the committee this evening.
Okay.
And then on Tuesday, you can go through it and make sure you're comfortable with all of the language and all of the
Yeah.
changes. And then maybe Senate Finance and Senate Natural Resources will give you a very easy response, either delete
Okay.
or it's good. And
Okay.
if they have proposed language changes, then we'll
So
tinker
we,
with it a little bit.
Who is going to finance?
So I am scheduled, Riley Allen is scheduled,
Okay,
Senator Perchlik,
okay.
I don't know if you're gonna be there, and then all of the electric distribution utilities and the PUC has been invited.
Okay,
And they have the updated language where instead of it says implement, it says offer.
Yeah,
I
okay.
provided Faith with the language or with the origin of that, as it was a proposal from VEC with
Okay.
DPS.
okay.
Being
And what section of the bill is that, Anthea? What's the discussion?
So it's section 21, that's the rate setting, the language that required all of the electric distribution utilities to offer PEV rates by June of 2024, unless they had an exemption. And then the 2 sections that are going to Senate Natural are 28A and 28B, which is the Act 250 exemption.
Okay.
All right.
so it looks like we are prepared to finalize everything Tuesday morning. And Jane will have a request. We'll have it to her.
Mhm.
And so anything else that anybody can think of at this time? If not, we'll wait for the final. We'll go through it one more time and make sure everything is understood. But I think we've gone through it pretty well.
Mhm. So
Uh,
at this point, then, just to confirm, we
Yeah.
have closed out everything except the 2 sections related to Act 250 and
Yeah.
the section on the rate EV rate setting.
That's what
But the other parts are done.
Yes, with the one tiny caveat that you have not seen the language on the summary section, but since that is just summarizing everything you're closing out, it's really just making sure that you're comfortable with the language. There is no policy or change in law or anything there. It's merely a summary of the rest of the bill and some highlights from the white book. And then you also haven't closed out section 1 being the most important section. It adopts everything, but I think you were basically there. You were just waiting to know what you were doing with the rest of the bill.
Michelle, other than including your pay raise, is there anything else you'd like to comment on at this time?
Correct, Senator Moss. I mean, thank you.
Hey, that's correct. Listen to that. Michelle said I'm correct.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right, Senator
You're
Mazza,
right.
All right. Finally.
In all seriousness, everything is in order from our perspective. One question I would have for you, Senator Mazza, is would Anthea be authorized to share the strike-all version with me when she shares it with the committee? So I'll have a chance to look through it this weekend.
I think you should. That'd be great. Yeah.
Thank
And we
you.
also haven't seen the final language on the joint transportation oversight insertion in that requested amendment.
Correct.
Our
And I'll
language.
highlight that in yellow so you know what's the new piece there.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank, certainly we all want to thank Anthea and Michelle for a fantastic job of bringing this to a head and good discussion. And so I look forward to the final draft and we can move on and wrap it up and then go to the committee of conference. It shouldn't be that involved, but you never know. Little things sometimes take a long time. But
You know, it's
it won't be long in
interesting.
appropriations. It won't be long there. So
You know, Senator Mazza, I was reading an editorial. I don't know if it was Bill Schubart or I can't remember. And they used that spreading the peanut butter. And that is not what maybe it was Emerson Lynn, an editorial and talking about really the need to direct money in the most long-term strategic way. And it was kind of interesting because a reference was made to do we spread the peanut butter or do we really use the funds in the most directed and long-term way? So I don't know if anybody else saw that editorial or not, but
speaking of
It
peanut
was-
butter, if you've tried the sugar-free, it's very good. It tastes just as good as a regular one if anybody's away from sugar. So.
You got a sale on that at the store? It seems
I
like,
don't sell it. I have to
seems
buy
like
it.
a sales pitch to me.
Yeah.
I thought we were gonna
Got three
talk
cases to
about,
get rid of.
we could talk about spreading the maple cream instead of peanut
There
butter.
you go, maple cream. I bought some new maple syrup yesterday. I got 25, 30 gallons of stuff and mixture, but the crop is out, so we're trying to sell that.
Mhm.
And don't forget, Michelle, my road in front of the store has to have a arrow directing traffic into the store. So,
Yeah, I was gonna put a one-way roundabout in.
right?
I thought you wanted a turn lane.
Well, don't forget the flashing highway sign.
That's right. I'll stand out front with a flashing sign. Me and Marty.
Oh, and I didn't read Marty's thing in the.
Oh, you got to read it. Excellent job.
They
Did
did
the
a
House
great
vote on that
job.
bill yesterday? The
Yeah,
bottom
they
bill?
voted it out.
90, you got 99 votes.
99 vote. Wow. Oh boy, that's dangerous. Okay. Other than that, we'll everybody's got a break at 11:30. I think 11:30, as you all heard, we're only going to do confirmations. There's nothing else on the calendar. So
Oh,
if
Well,
you have
that's-
confirmations, they warned me of one on Joe Flynn, and I don't know, somebody else, Senator Ingalls, you have one?
Yeah, I've got Michael Sherling and our own Wanda Manoli.
You have them both?
Yeah.
Oh, how were you lucky to get both?
Oh, I don't know. You thought I needed more practice. I think
Oh, I
that's what was
see.
said.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Yeah,
Senator
you as well.
Yes.
Are you
Thank
ending
you.
for the day or is this just?
Yes,
a
we're
break?
ending for the day. Yes.
Okay.
we're adjourning.
We're
All right.
adjourning for the